If you've been following the news, if you've been seeing my channel, you know that things aren't exactly easy for YouTube creators. That YouTube, with its massive platform and its lack of transparency, often leaves us in the dark about what we can and cannot do, what gets us demonetized or not, what gets videos promoted or not, and there's a general sense that things need to change. And in Europe, there are YouTubers working with IG Metal, one of the world's biggest unions, a big metal union in Germany, to form an actual group that will try to collectively bargain with YouTube to fix some of these issues. And they range from, more human interaction with creators big and small, bringing back the ability to monetize small channels so you don't need 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time, to ensure that when creators' videos are demonetized, they're given specific, concrete reasons why they've been demonetized, and on and on and on. I don't need to go into the details. I also don't even need to go into the details about why I support this. You guys know I'm a dyed-in-the-wool trade unionist, I'm a labor historian, and I think that a union of YouTubers, again, the legalities are going to be complicated, but the idea of it is something that I 100% support, and something that, if I'm able, given the jurisdictional realities, will do my best to be a part of. But there's a big creator who just released a video on this, and I really do have to respond to them. I don't want to start a drama war, but I feel that their position is really troubling and is really problematic. And I'm talking about David Pakman. He's got a very large YouTube channel, one of the largest YouTube channels that covers news and politics, especially from something of an at least ostensibly progressive perspective. And David Pakman basically came out and said that while he supports the idea of unions, he feels this union is bad for him and for channels like his because they're so big and powerful, they have no use for a union. And I'll play that clip for you here.
I also need to be very honest with you. I don't think I'd be interested in being a part of this YouTubers union at this point in time based on our challenge size, on our channel size, and I'll explain to you why. I support unions. I think collective bargaining is a great way for individual players to get more clout and have more control over their circumstances. I support teachers' unions. I support factory workers' unions and transportation workers unionizing and pilots, sports league players, the whole thing. But that being said, right now, given that my channel is one of the, in the top 1 or 2% of YouTube, I don't believe it would be to my advantage to get into a union unless it's a union of news and politics YouTubers that are my size or larger, which are relatively few. And what I mean by that is, now that my channel is run as a part of a broader business that is very different than what it was even 2 years ago when we had a couple 100,000 subscribers, there is no way that a consortium or a union of channels that are not just news and politics, that are everything from makeup and gaming and sports and whatever else, and drastically different sizes, there's no way that it would be to my advantage to be in that union because our needs and our circumstances are now so different than those of the majority of YouTube channels. Now, you might hear me say this and react by saying, oh, David, that's because your channel is successful. That's why. I mean, I'm recognizing that. I'm not denying it. I want the full freedom to do or not do anything I want on YouTube. I want the freedom to put my content or not on any other platform that I want. I am actually at the point where only a union of the top news and politics channels would actually be useful, and that would arguably defeat the kind of egalitarian nature of the union.
So lest you think I was putting words into David's mouth, he's very clear. He likes the idea of unions, but he feels that a union for him only works if it's for people for him and bigger. Only if you sort of cloister around a narrow elite of large channels will a union work for him. He doesn't feel it's in his interests to work with small channels, or even, frankly, regular sized or even large channels of 100, 200,000 subscribers. They're not big enough for David. David only wants to work with his fellow YouTube elite to put forward their interests. He says he supports unions, but that's not how unions work. Unions work on the concept, above all, of solidarity of all workers in the workplace, to promote the interests of everyone. Even if you're a little better off, the idea that you wouldn't support a union because of that, because you might have to work with those with less, is not a pro-union position whatsoever. This idea from David that because he's in the YouTube 1 or 2%, he doesn't need to support a union of the 98 or 99% of YouTubers really strikes me as a very conservative, almost pro-right-to-work argument, that because he's exceptional, the union would only hold him back. Unions are fine for teachers and for construction workers and for factory workers, but and for regular, YouTubers, but for the stars like him, it would only hold him back. And the union's demands are very basic, and he would benefit from them. His videos get demonetized. His videos can be targeted sometimes, whether targeted on purpose or just by the capriciousness of the algorithm. He would benefit from this system. But he makes the case that it would take away his flexibility. It would take away his freedom to associate with his fellow creators. And that is a textbook anti-union argument used by employers to go to workers and say, you're a hard worker, you're a good worker, you're better than your colleagues, don't let the union hold you back from your individual greatness. That's what David is saying here, in effect. He's saying he doesn't have interests with the regular YouTubers, that his interests are only maybe those of the biggest creators. And David's almost working in a historical angle here, which is that of the old exclusive craft unions. They didn't want to organize the racialized and poor and immigrant unskilled laborers. They only wanted a union of elite skilled tradesmen who had years of experience and had, a relatively middle-class lifestyle, and they didn't want to unionize the unskilled laborers, the masses of workers. And it wasn't until the big unions like the steel workers and auto workers and some of the bigger railway unions and some of the miners unions, for instance, when they started organizing workers, all workers, en masse, that we saw real positive change for all working class people. And unions were no longer just a preserve of a narrow skilled elite, but belonged to everyone, or at least a lot more people. And David is basically arguing that he doesn't need a union, or that if he does, it has to be a union like those elite craft unions, only for people like his size or bigger, which is very convenient if I'm being honest. It seems to say that no channel smaller than him can be in the union, but what if a channel one slot bigger said the same thing about him? How would he feel if the 1% instead of the 1 and 2% of YouTube formed a union to negotiate and to build better relationships with YouTube, leaving him out because his channel's not big enough and they supposedly don't share the same interests? He wouldn't feel very good. And so from my perspective, this sort of attitude from, again, a supposed progressive voice on YouTube is really bad. It's really troubling to me. And his solution, he says the whole problem is that YouTube is based on this advertising model where, we're reliant on YouTube to negotiate ad deals with big corporations, and that's always going to put creators last. And I don't think he's wrong there. But his solution is for everyone to just, directly support the creators they support. But the reality of Patreon is it's not a egalitarian system. And so it's very easy for a large established channel to make the claim that we don't need this ad revenue, please just support us on Patreon. We don't need the union. The freedom of Patreon gives us everything we need. It's very easy for them to make that argument when they're not trying to build a channel, where ad revenue and Patreon are both often, necessary to have any kind of success. So I don't want to rant too much. I like some of David's content. I don't like all of it. I don't agree with everything he says. But I think this is a particularly troubling take by him, because it's going to feed the very anti-union narratives that he supposedly stands against. That when a teacher says, I don't want to be in a union because I'll be held back by the lower quality teachers, or I don't want to join a union because I make $10 an hour more than another guy in the factory, and if I join a union, the union will hold me back. Or I don't want to join a union because my boss says that the flexibility to do what's needed is more important than solidarity among workers. Any YouTube union is going to have a real hard time succeeding. But one thing above all that's sure to kill it is the big stars, whether it's genre specific or in general, feeling it's not in their interest to be a part of it. It will be 100% required, not only for the masses of smaller and medium-sized channels to join, but for the bigger channels to become leaders in this movement. And when they take a stance that they're too good for the union, or the union will remove their flexibility, they're just carrying water for anti-union voices, not just on YouTube, but in those fields that they supposedly support unionization in. And I'm not the only one making points on this. Some of the comments on that video are saying what I'm saying. And these are fans of David saying, David, this is sort of unfair. We can't support 100 different creators on Patreon. We don't have that ability. And so the bigger creators will be fine, but the smaller creators will struggle. Or that, this is the same sort of argument that conservatives make when they oppose unions. Or that, this is sort of pulling up the ladder. For the 1 or 2% or 3% of channels that have made it, they're fine. But for the smaller channels just coming up, they're not going to have the solidarity of these larger channels. And he says 1 or 2 years ago I might have needed this union, but I don't anymore. But what if now he was in the position he was 1 or 2 years ago, and he was being hit with these demonetizations, and he was being hit with the inconsistency of content? I think he might be singing a different tune. And that's what matters here. Unions don't just work when they work for you specifically. Unions are about solidarity and about unity. And if he can't see that, then I don't know how much he really supports unions.